My name is Sarah, I'm 29 years old, and I need to tell you about the moment I realized my family had been systematically devaluing me for years while pouring everything they had into my brother's endless failures. What started as a desperate request for a $500 emergency loan exposed a pattern of financial manipulation so deep that when the tables finally turned, my family discovered they had destroyed their relationship with the one person who could actually save them. If you've ever felt like the forgotten child, the one who gets the leftovers while watching your sibling get the feast, this story is going to hit you right in the heart. And if you've ever wondered whether standing up for yourself is worth losing family relationships, stick around because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and my own worth. Growing up, I was what people called the responsible one. While my older brother Jake bounced from job to job, hobby to hobby, crisis to crisis, I was the kid who worked part-time through high school, saved every penny for college, and graduated with honors and minimal debt. My parents always praised my independence, calling me their self-sufficient daughter. But I'm starting to understand that what they called independence was actually just neglect dressed up as a compliment. Jake, on the other hand, was the dreamer, the creative one, the one with big ideas who just needed the right opportunity to shine. Every family gathering became a showcase for his latest venture, his newest plan, his next big break. My parents would listen with the kind of rapt attention I craved but never received when I talked about my steady job as a marketing coordinator, my savings goals, or my quiet achievements. The pattern started early. When Jake dropped out of his third college attempt to pursue photography, my parents worried but supported him. When I graduated summa cum laude, they attended the ceremony but spent the entire reception talking about how concerned they were, about Jake finding his path. When Jake's photography business failed after 6 months, they helped him transition into graphic design. When I got promoted at work, they nodded approvingly and immediately pivoted to asking if I could help Jake. With his resume, I told myself this was normal. Jake needed more support because he struggled more. I was the strong one, the capable one, the one who didn't need help. But looking back, I can see how systematically they had trained me to expect less while teaching him to expect everything. The financial disparity became impossible to ignore as we entered our 20s. When Jake decided to start his first real business, a custom t-shirt printing company, my parents didn't hesitate to co-sign a $15,000 business loan. When the business folded after 8 months, they absorbed the debt without complaint. When Jake pivoted to web design, they funded a $12,000 computer setup and home office renovation. When that venture fizzled, they called it a learning experience. Meanwhile, I was paying my own rent, buying my own groceries, covering my own insurance, and even contributing to family dinners when I visited. When I asked my dad for advice about investing my savings, he suggested I keep it simple and safe. When Jake asked for investment in his third business venture, a food truck that never quite materialized, they liquidated part of their retirement. Fun to give him $18,000. I wish I could say I spoke up then, but I had been so thoroughly conditioned to be the easy child that I swallowed my resentment and convinced myself that love wasn't supposed to be transactional. They were helping Jake because he needed help. I didn't need help because I was capable. This logic made sense until it absolutely didn't. The breaking point came last March during what should have been one of the happiest periods of my life. I had just gotten engaged to my boyfriend of 3 years, Marcus, and we were planning a small wedding for the fall. We were handling most of the costs ourselves, but I was excited to share our joy with my family and maybe get some emotional support during the planning process. Instead, that same month, Jake announced his biggest venture yet. He had partnered with 2 friends to launch a boutique fitness studio specializing in high-end personal training and wellness coaching. The business plan was ambitious, the startup costs were substantial, and Jake was convinced this was his ticket to finally proving himself as a successful entrepreneur. The initial investment he needed was $50,000. I remember the family dinner where he pitched the idea. Spreadsheets printed and bound, passion radiating from every word as he described the market opportunity, the competitive advantage, the projected returns. My parents listened with the kind of focused attention that made my chest tight with familiar longing. By the end of the evening, they had agreed to provide the full amount, combining savings, a home equity loan, and cashing out some investments, $50,000 for Jake's fourth business venture, while I was planning a wedding on a shoestring. Budget, covering every expense myself, grateful for their emotional support, if not their financial contribution. I tried to be happy for him. I really did. Jake had always struggled with self-confidence, and seeing him excited about something felt worth celebrating. But watching my parents reorganize their entire financial picture to fund his dream while I scraped together money for wedding flowers stirred up emotions I wasn't prepared to handle. The fitness studio launched with great fanfare in June. Jake posted constantly on social media, my parents shared every update with pride, and for a few months, it seemed like maybe this time would be different. The studio was beautiful, the equipment was state-of-the-art, and Jake threw himself into the business with more dedication than I had seen from him before. Then, August arrived with a financial emergency that changed everything. Marcus had been laid off from his job in July, and while he was actively interviewing, our savings were stretched thin, covering both our expenses and wedding costs. When my car broke down and needed $500 in repairs, I faced a choice between fixing my transportation to work or making our final wedding venue payment. I had never asked my parents for money, not once in my adult life. But with the wedding 6 weeks away and Marcus still job hunting, I swallowed my pride and called my mother. I explained the situation calmly, emphasizing that it was a loan, not a gift, and that I could pay it back within 2 months once Marcus was employed again. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long, I thought the call had dropped. When my mother finally responded, her tone was careful, almost rehearsed. She explained that they had just put so much money into Jake's business, their liquid savings were depleted, and they were still adjusting to the new financial reality. She suggested I talk to my bank about a personal loan, or maybe ask Marcus's family for help. $500, after they had just invested $50,000 in Jake's venture. I hung up feeling like I had been slapped. Not because I felt entitled to their money, but because the message was crystal clear. Jake's dreams were worth restructuring their finances, but my emergency wasn't worth $500. I fixed my car with a credit card and made the venue payment by selling some jewelry. I didn't tell anyone in my family about the solution because something fundamental had shifted in how I saw our relationships. The wedding planning continued, but I found myself pulling back emotionally, going through the motions while processing this new understanding of where I stood in their priorities. The wedding itself was beautiful and small, exactly what Marcus and I wanted. My parents attended and seemed happy, taking photos and congratulating us warmly. But I noticed things I had previously overlooked, how they spent most of the reception talking to other guests about Jake's business, how they left early because they had promised to help him with some studio marketing the next day, how their wedding gift was thoughtful but modest, while I later learned they had bought Jake new sound equipment for the studio the same week. Meanwhile, Jake's business was already showing cracks. The high-end personal training market in our mid-sized city wasn't as robust as projected. Overhead costs were exceeding revenue, and client retention was becoming a problem. By October, Jake was stressed and my parents were worried, but they continued to support him emotionally and financially, covering a few months of rent when cash flow got tight. I watched this unfold while establishing my new married life with Marcus, who had found an even better job and whose perspective on my family dynamics was illuminating. He couldn't understand why I seemed grateful for basic parental attention, why I downplayed my achievements, or why I made excuses for treatment that he saw as obviously unfair. Marcus helped me recognize that the $500 incident wasn't really about money. It was about a lifetime of being the child who was expected to manage independently, while Jake was the child whose struggles mobilized the entire family's resources. It was about being praised for not needing help while secretly craving the kind of support that was lavished on my brother without question. The fitness studio closed in February, exactly 8 months after opening. Jake lost everything, and my parents absorbed another massive financial hit. This time, though, the loss was devastating. Between the business loan, the home equity loan, and the depleted savings, they had invested their financial security in a venture that returned nothing. I felt terrible for Jake, who was genuinely heartbroken and embarrassed, but I also felt a complicated mix of vindication and sadness watching my parents face the consequences of their pattern of financial enabling. They had bet everything on the wrong horse while treating their stable, responsible daughter like she didn't need or deserve their investment. What happened next, though, nobody saw. coming. In March, almost exactly a year after the $500 incident, I received a call that changed everything. The marketing agency where I worked had been acquired by a larger firm, and they were offering me a position as regional marketing director, with a salary increase of $40,000 annually. It was a dream job I hadn't even known I wanted, recognition for years of steady, excellent work that had built my reputation in the industry. Around the same time, Marcus and I had been house hunting, and we found a perfect starter home. Between my new salary and his stable income, we were approved for a mortgage and ready to move forward with the next phase of our lives. I was excited to share the news with my family, hoping they would celebrate these milestones with the enthusiasm they had always shown for Jake's ventures. But when I called to tell them about the promotion, my mother's response was distracted. She congratulated me quickly before launching into the real concern on her mind. Jake was spiraling after the business failure, he was struggling to find work, and they were worried about his depression and financial situation. When I mentioned the house purchase, my father's first comment was wondering if we had considered getting something with a guest room or basement apartment that Jake could rent affordably while he got back on his feet. Even my successes were being filtered through the lens of how they might solve Jake's problems. That night, Marcus and I had a long conversation about boundaries and what kind of relationship I wanted with my family going forward. I realized that I had spent my entire adult life being grateful for crumbs while watching them serve Jake a feast, and that pattern wasn't going to change unless I changed it. I decided to pull back and focus on my own life for a while. I didn't cut off contact, but I stopped initiating calls, stopped offering solutions to Jake's problems, and stopped making myself available as the family's emotional support system. I was polite but distant, focusing on my marriage, my new job, and my own goals. The distance gave me perspective I hadn't had before. I could see how much emotional labor I had been doing to maintain relationships where I gave much more than I received. I could see how my parents had trained me to be thankful for basic attention while teaching Jake to expect rescue from every consequence of his choices. What I couldn't see was the financial crisis that was building in my parents' household. Chig. Call came in July, 4 months after I had started setting boundaries. My mother's voice was strained in a way I had never heard before. She explained that they were facing foreclosure on their house. The combination of the home equity loan from Jake's business, the reduced income from my father's recent retirement, and some unexpected medical expenses had created a perfect storm of financial pressure. They had explored every option, she said. They had talked to banks about loan modifications, considered selling the house and downsizing, and even looked into bankruptcy. But there was one potential solution that could save their home and their credit. They needed someone to co-sign a debt consolidation loan that would allow them to restructure their payments and keep the house. The person they needed to co-sign was someone with excellent credit, stable income, and the financial capacity to handle the monthly payments if necessary. Someone like me, with my new salary and perfect payment history. I listened to my mother explain their situation with a mixture of sadness and irony, so sharp it took my breath away. They needed me to risk my financial future to save theirs. Less than 18 months after telling me they couldn't spare $500 for my emergency. I told her I needed time to think about it. That evening, Marcus and I discussed the situation thoroughly. The loan they were requesting would put our house purchase on hold and tie up our finances for years. It would also mean taking responsibility for debt they had accumulated primarily through funding Jake's failed businesses. The financial risk was significant, but the emotional weight was even heavier. I realized this was the moment that would define our relationships going forward. I could rescue them, proving once again that I was the reliable child who could be counted on in crisis, or I could maintain the boundaries I had started to establish and let them face the consequences of their financial choices. The decision wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about recognizing that being the capable child shouldn't mean being the one who sacrifices her own financial security to clean up messes created by decades of enabling someone else. I called my mother back 2 days later and explained that I wouldn't be able to co-sign the loan. I offered to help them explore other options, connect them with financial counselors, and provide emotional support. But I couldn't risk my own financial stability to solve a crisis that stemmed from choices I had warned them about years earlier. The reaction was immediate and devastating. My mother accused me of being selfish and cold-hearted. My father sent me a long email detailing everything they had done for me over the years and expressing disappointment that I wouldn't help them when they needed me most. Jake called me crying, saying I was the only one who could save their childhood home, and he couldn't understand how I could turn my back on family. The guilt was overwhelming, but Marcus helped me see through the manipulation. They were trying to use my lifetime of conditioning as the responsible child to make me feel obligated to rescue them from the consequences of their choice to prioritize Jake's ventures over financial stability. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't the same person who had quietly accepted being overlooked for years. I had learned my worth through my professional success, my marriage, and the clarity that came from stepping back from their dysfunction. The foreclosure moved forward, and my parents lost their house. They downsized to a small rental, and the financial stress damaged their credit and retirement security. Jake moved in with them temporarily, adding to the household tension and expenses. During this time, I maintained limited contact, checking in occasionally, but not offering solutions or emotional labor. I focused on my own life, excelling in my new role, and building the future Marcus and I wanted together. The vindication I felt wasn't satisfaction at their suffering. It was the quiet confidence that comes from recognizing your own value and refusing to accept less than you deserve. I'd spent decades believing that love meant accepting whatever scraps of attention and support they offered while watching them pour everything into Jake. But real love doesn't involve systematic devaluation of one person to enable another. 6 months later, something unexpected happened that forced my family to confront the reality of how they had treated me. My company was featured in a major industry publication for an innovative marketing campaign I had developed. The article highlighted my role in the project and included quotes from executives praising my creativity and leadership. It was the kind of professional recognition that typically leads to speaking opportunities, job offers from competitors, and significant career advancement. The article was shared widely in our professional community, and several people forwarded it to my parents and Jake. Suddenly, my family was seeing me through the eyes of people who recognized my competence and valued my contributions. The praise in the article was the kind of enthusiastic support they had never shown for my quiet, steady achievements. My father called me after reading the article, his voice filled with a pride that felt both wonderful and heartbreaking. He told me how impressed he was, how he had shared the article with his friends, and how proud he was to be my father. But underneath his excitement, I could hear the confusion of someone realizing they had been overlooking something valuable that was right in front of them. That conversation led to a series of discussions over the following weeks where my parents began to acknowledge the disparity in how they had treated Jake and me. My mother admitted that they had always assumed I didn't need their support because I was so capable. But she was beginning to understand that capable people still need encouragement and investment. My father acknowledged that they had enabled Jake's dependency while taking my independence for granted. He said he was proud of how I had handled their financial crisis, even though it had been painful at the time, because I had shown strength and principles that he was only now learning to appreciate. Jake's recognition was the most meaningful, because it came without prompting from our parents. He called me one evening to apologize for the years of accepting financial support that he now realized had come at the cost of my own needs being overlooked. He said reading about my professional success had made him realize how little he actually knew about my accomplishments, because the family conversations always centered on his struggles. These acknowledgments didn't immediately repair our relationships, but they created space for honest conversations about patterns that had developed over decades. Through family therapy sessions that I insisted on before rebuilding trust, we were able to identify how the family system had assigned us roles that weren't healthy for anyone. I learned that my parents' favoritism toward Jake hadn't been conscious malice, but rather anxiety-driven. Enabling that had prevented him from developing real resilience. They had been so focused on protecting him from failure that they had robbed him of opportunities to build genuine confidence through overcoming challenges. Jake learned that the financial support he had received had actually been a burden that prevented him from developing realistic expectations and sustainable business practices. The constant safety net had enabled poor decision-making and unrealistic risk assessment. I learned that my role as the capable child had isolated me from the kind of support and encouragement that might have helped me reach my potential even sooner. I had been so busy proving I didn't need help that I had missed opportunities to ask for the mentorship and investment that could have accelerated my growth. The healing process has been gradual and conditional. I've rebuilt relationships with my parents based on mutual respect rather than old patterns of obligation and neglect. They've learned to celebrate my successes with genuine enthusiasm and to consult me on decisions rather than assuming I'll go along with whatever they choose. Jake and I have developed a friendship as adults that wasn't possible when our family system pitted his needs against my independence. He's found work that suits his skills without requiring massive financial investment, and he's learned to appreciate steady progress over dramatic breakthroughs. Most importantly, I've learned that self-worth doesn't come from being the child who needs less. It comes from recognizing your own value and insisting that others recognize it too. The $500 my parents refused to lend me taught me that I was worth more than whatever amount they were willing to invest in my life. Today, Marcus and I own our dream home, my career continues to flourish, and I have relationships with my family that are based on genuine mutual respect, rather than dysfunctional patterns of enabling and neglect. The financial crisis that my parents faced was devastating, but it ultimately forced all of us to confront truths about our family that needed to be addressed. If you're watching this and recognizing your own family patterns in this story, please know that you don't have to accept being the forgotten child, the responsible one, or the person who gets less because you need less. Your worth isn't determined by how little support you require or how much you can give to others who take without reciprocating. Setting boundaries feels scary when you've been trained to be grateful for scraps, but the relationships you build on the other side of those boundaries will be so much more authentic and fulfilling than the ones built on obligation and guilt. You deserve to be celebrated for your successes, supported during your struggles, and valued for who you are rather than what you can provide. Don't let anyone convince you that love means accepting less than your worth. Have you experienced financial favoritism in your family? Have you been the child who was expected to be self-sufficient while watching resources flow to a sibling? Who struggled more? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, because sharing these experiences helps all of us recognize that we're not alone in navigating complicated family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more content about setting healthy boundaries and building authentic relationships. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to enable their dysfunctional patterns, even when that choice is painful for everyone involved. Remember, you are worthy of investment, celebration, and support. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.